In the sweltering heat of 1880s Arizona, where the red earth stretched out like a vast, unforgiving canvas painted with the blood of forgotten battles, Elias Hawthorne rode into the border town of Dust Haven, his spurs jingling against the flanks of his weary stallion. A man hardened by years of taming the wild frontier with nothing but grit and gold in his pockets. He was a rancher of considerable means, owner of the sprawling Hawthorne Ranch that sprawled across thousands of acres, where cattle roamed freely and dreams of empire were built on the backs of laborers who came cheap in these lawless times. Elias had lost his wife to a fever 2 years prior, a loss that had carved deep lines into his once handsome face, turning his heart into a fortress of solitude, guarded by walls of routine and isolation. On this particular day, driven by the need for help around the house, cooking, cleaning, mending the endless tears in his world, he found himself drawn to the weekly auction at the edge of town, where traders peddled everything from livestock to human souls, remnants of the chaotic aftermath of the Indian wars that had ravaged the land. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, tobacco, and despair as Elias pushed through the crowd of roughnecks and opportunists, his boots kicking up dust that clung to his leather chaps like ghosts of the past. The auctioneer, a wiry man with a voice like gravel underfoot, banged his gavel to silence the murmurs, announcing the next lot. A group of captives from a recent skirmish with roaming bands, their faces etched with the silent agony of defeat. Among them stood a young woman, no more than 20, her long black hair matted and wild, her buckskin dress torn and stained from days of hardship. But her posture was defiant, her chin held high, as if she were surveying her kingdom rather than facing the humiliation of the block. Her eyes, dark as the midnight sky over the mesas, scanned the bidders with the intensity that made many avert their gaze. But Elias felt an inexplicable pull, a whisper in his soul that this was no ordinary purchase. He raised his hand, his voice steady as he outbid the leering miners and drifters, securing her for a sum that barely dented his fortune. Thinking only of the practicalities, she looked strong enough to handle the chores, resilient in a way that promised reliability without the complications of conversation or complaint. As the transaction concluded, the traders handed her over with chains that clinked like accusations, warning Elias that she was a wild one, fresh from the reservations. But he dismissed their words with a wave, leading her to his wagon under the glaring sun, her silence a veil that hid the storm brewing within. Back at the ranch, as the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in hues of crimson and gold, Elias showed her to the small quarters behind the main house, a modest shack with a cot, a basin, and the bare essentials, expecting gratitude or at least submission. But she met his instructions with a stoic nod, her movements graceful yet guarded, like a panther pacing its cage. He assigned her tasks, fetching water from the well, preparing meals from the sparse pantry, tending to the garden that struggled against the arid soil, and she performed them with an efficiency that surprised him, her hands moving with a precision born of survival rather than servitude. Days turned into weeks, and Elias found himself watching her more closely, noting the way she whispered to the wind in a language he didn't understand, or how she stared at the distant mountains as if they called her name, evoking a pang in his chest that reminded him of his lost love, a woman who had once filled his days with laughter and light. One evening, as thunder rumbled across the sky like the drums of war, a storm broke loose, flooding the arroyos and threatening the livestock. And in the chaos, she sprang into action, herding the frightened animals with commands that seemed to bend the elements to her will, saving a calf from the raging waters with a bravery that left Elias breathless. That night, as they sat by the fire in the main house, drying off from the deluge, he offered her a cup of coffee, a small gesture of thanks. And for the first time, she spoke, her voice soft yet resonant, laced with an accent that carried the echoes of canyons and campfires. "You think you own me, but the land owns us all." Her words hung in the air like smoke, stirring something deep within him, a curiosity that bordered on fascination, as he began to question the narrative he'd bought into, the story of conquest and control that had defined his life. As the seasons shifted, subtle changes emerged. She taught him, unwittingly at first, the ways of the land he thought he knew, pointing out edible plants in the desert scrub, predicting weather patterns from the flight of birds, and sharing fragments of stories about stars that guided warriors home. Elias, in turn, softened his edges, sharing meals with her instead of leaving her to eat alone, recounting tales of his youth in the East before the call of the West drew him away. And in these moments, a fragile bond formed, threaded with unspoken emotions that neither dared to name. Yet beneath it all, she harbored secrets, her nights spent gazing at the moon, whispering prayers to ancestors whose spirits lingered in the wind, her true identity a flame kept hidden, waiting for the right spark to ignite. Elias noticed the scars on her arms, marks of battles long past, and the necklace she clutched, a beaded talisman that seemed to pulse with life. And though he pressed gently for answers, she deflected with smiles that didn't reach her eyes, building a wall of mystery that only heightened his intrigue. One fateful day, as riders approached the ranch, bounty hunters seeking escaped natives, she vanished into the shadows, only to reappear with a rifle in hand, her stance that of a protector rather than a servant, forcing Elias to confront the reality that she was more than he had bargained for, a woman whose past was a tapestry of royalty and resistance, the last heir to a throne of eagles and earth. The tension mounted as whispers of her heritage began to surface in town, rumors carried on the lips of traders who had glimpsed her royal bearing, setting the stage for revelations that would shatter his world and rebuild it anew, all while the emotional undercurrents of loss, longing, and love swirled like the dust storms that defined their existence. Through it all, Elias grappled with his own demons, the guilt of his role in a system that commodified lives, and the budding affection that made him question everything, leading to nights of sleepless reflection where he pondered the cost of his ambitions and the value of a soul unbound. As Chapter 1 drew to its close, the stage was set for the storm to break, with Elias on the cusp of discovering the truth that would redefine them both, a truth wrapped in the heartache of a people nearly erased but never truly defeated. As the first rays of dawn pierced the veil of night over Hawthorne Ranch, casting long shadows that danced like specters across the parched ground, Elias awoke to the sound of distant hoofbeats, a rhythmic thunder that heralded change and chaos in equal measure, pulling him from dreams haunted by the enigmatic woman he had come to know as Nita, a name she had given reluctantly, meaning bear in her tongue, though he sensed it was but a fragment of her story. The riders who approached were no ordinary visitors. They were federal agents, their badges gleaming under the rising sun, accompanied by a grizzled scout who claimed knowledge of the Apache remnants, his eyes narrowing as they fell upon Nita working in the yard, her movements fluid and purposeful as she drew water from the well. Elias stepped out to greet them, his hand instinctively resting on the revolver at his hip, a habit born of frontier vigilance. But the lead agent, a stern man named Captain Harlan, wasted no time in pleasantries, declaring that they were hunting a fugitive princess, the last daughter of Chief Geronimo's line, believed to have been captured and sold after a brutal raid that had decimated her clan. The description matched Nita perfectly. The proud bearing, the intricate tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve, a mark of royalty among her people. And as the words hung heavy in the air, Elias felt his world tilt, a surge of protectiveness washing over him like a flash flood, mingled with the sting of betrayal that she had concealed such a monumental truth. Nita, overhearing the confrontation, dropped the bucket with a clatter that echoed like a gunshot, her eyes meeting Elias's in a silent plea that spoke volumes of trust earned through shared trials. And in that moment, he made a choice, denying any knowledge of such a person, claiming she was merely a hired hand from Mexico. But the scout sneered, recognizing the talisman around her neck as a sacred artifact passed down through generations of Apache leaders. Chaos erupted as the agents moved to seize her, guns drawn in a tense standoff. But Nita, revealing her warrior spirit, dodged with agility honed in the canyons of her homeland, grabbing a nearby shovel as a makeshift weapon and fending off an attacker with a ferocity that left Elias in awe, her cries in Apache ringing out like battle hymns. In the fray, Elias joined the fight, his loyalty shifting